Let's put our hands together for Karl. Now, I'm not going to talk much because I know how expensive attorneys are, and I want them to get full use and opportunity to hear what you have to say. So let me just turn it right over to you, and you pretty much know what I'm looking for.
Yeah, Rick, and the first thing I'd like to do is I would like to say we should give Rick a big round of applause. Because
all right, that's it.
This is an incredible program, and I have a big passion for this subject, this life, everything about it. I love what I do. And one of the great things about Rick and what he's brought to the table for all aspiring artists, and myself included, is renewing the passion. And what getting ready for this discussion did for me was got me to go back and review kind of everything I know and have come to know, and going back to things that I used to know that I needed to find out again. So I wanted to thank you, Rick, for that, and I really value the relationship that I've developed with Rick, and he's opened a lot of doors and opened my eyes to a lot of things that I probably wouldn't have seen for another 5 or 10 years. So really sped things up for me. That's kind of funny you would say that about attorneys being expensive. One of the reasons contracts, and I didn't expect to say this, but this spurred a thought. One of the reasons contracts are so long, when you see an exclusive artist agreement, it's 30, 40, maybe 50 pages, and with the 360 deals, they've gotten even longer. Well, what happens is, not only does litigation cause these contracts to get longer, but in the very beginning, lawyers charged by the word, believe it or not. So when you get all the wherefores and all the different boilerplate, lawyers used to charge by the word, not by the hour. So as kind of an interesting aside, that's one of the reasons a lot of these contracts have the 2 widths and the various language that you wonder why is that in there? Well, in the beginning, it's because we charge by the word. It would be nice if we could charge by the word now, I guess. But one of the things I was going to just let you know real briefly where I came from, so that you kind of know. And this is kind of the narcissistic part of the presentation, but to let you know where I came from, just so you know that I'm not just an attorney, and that's being an attorney is my life now, but being a music, entertainment, intellectual property attorney is more what my life is about. And I started out as a musician. I grew up here in Nashville. Unfortunately, I left in 1976 to go to college, because I wanted to get away from home, I wanted to get away from my parents, and I wanted to get down to Florida where I could party and go to the beach all the time. Unfortunately for me, I had been a musician all my childhood, and one of my lifetime heroes is Dan Fogelberg, and little did I know that while I was growing up here, he was recording one of my favorite albums in Quad Studios. So it's one of those things, if only I knew then what I know now, maybe things would have been different, but I wouldn't trade the journey for anything. One of the things I did, I went to Eckerd College down in St. Petersburg. It's a small liberal arts college, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to play guitar, and so I minored in classical guitar, and I majored in creative writing. And during that entire time, I played with another guy in a duo, a kind of a Logs and Messina, Seals and Crofts kind of duo. And we toured the Southeast. We went up to New York for a while. We went to Cape Cod. Our small claims to fame were that we opened for a band called Little Feat that some of you may know. This was around the time that Lowell George died. We opened for Little Feat. I eventually left that affiliation. He and I are still good friends, but I moved to Atlanta, Georgia with a couple of other guys that I had come to know working in a record store in St. Petersburg, and who eventually started a record label, which really got me interested in entertainment law. But when I was in Atlanta, I played with Emily Sowers and Amy Ray, both before and after they became the Indigo Girls. So I had a little bit of taste of the successful side of the music business, but $50 a night and all the beer I could drink wasn't going to support a family once I turned 30. So we didn't have social media. At that time I had, in the 70s, I had to just hope that Irving Azoff walked into a bar where I was playing and liked what I was doing. And as you can imagine, that was few and far between. But what that led me to, the two guys that I moved to Atlanta with were from Florida. And they started a record label called DM Records, and they were on the forefront of what was known then as bass music. They heard lowriders in Miami going by with loud bass booming, and we had played in a band for a long period of time. And so what they did was these two guys started a record label, and just the two of them, they were very adept at recording and electronic music. So what they did was they were doing this electronica, and all they did was they boost the bass frequency, and they invented names of bands like Bass Invaders, Bass 305, and they would release records. And back then, of course, in '91, physical sales were huge still. So one of the sales points was that the CDs had warning labels on them that said, "Warning, low bass frequency may damage your speakers." Well, that was as much a warning as it was a marketing tool, because the people that had these low-riding vehicles, were challenged by that. It'll damage my speakers, so that spurred sales, and they didn't need radio, which was another brilliant move on their part. Once a song got on the radio, their audience didn't want to have anything to do with it anymore, because now it was mainstream. And they were subculture, they wanted to remain subculture. So they had huge success with this, and their fictional bands. Bass 305 was their first band, and they charted on Billboard and the Heat Seekers, and the second band that they created was Bass Invaders. And of course, Bass Invaders thanked Bass 305 for discovering them. And it was still just these two guys. It was the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain. The really interesting thing too was they didn't have to tour. These people they didn't want to go see Bass 305 live. They could care less, but they were interested in how they could challenge their speakers. So what happened at that time, and to give away somewhat of a secret of my past, one of the reasons I've been a voting member of the Grammys since 1993 was because I performed on one of these bass records. And by performing, I mean I spun a record and acted kind of DJ-ish for a little while, and that got me the pass to become a voting member of the Grammys. It wasn't because of my own prowess or my own recording skills as an artist myself. That experience led me to the idea that I was working in a college textbook store at the time in Atlanta while I was playing music at night. And I decided when I turned 30, this is the big 30. At that time, I was still on that tail end of 30. You don't trust anybody that's 30. So now that I was 30, I decided, what am I going to do with a creative writing degree and a minor in classical guitar? I can't go become an accounting executive or a marketing guy, or a banker. So I went to law school at night, and one of my first projects straight out of law school, I was still practicing in the back of this bookstore. At that time we had telex. So you had telex tape going through this machine, and I had a fax machine, and we always used fax. So I would change the fax machine from Georgia Bookstore to Karl Braun Esquire when I was faxing out a letter, So I was practicing law in the back of a college textbook store. I had to be careful, too, if I didn't change the fax back to Georgia Bookstore, and I sent out a book list. It was a little suspicious. But one of the first things that happened was one of the bands that this record company, DM Records, had formed was a band called La Zoo. Well, at that time, Mick Fleetwood had a band called Mick Fleetwood and the Zoo. Promptly, DM Records was threatened with a lawsuit, and it was in front of the Trademark Trial and Appeals Board. And the lawsuit involved whether or not La Zoo was an infringement upon the trademark Mick Fleetwood and the Zoo. I had no experience whatsoever with intellectual property law in real life, and we didn't have I didn't have easy access to Lexis or Westlaw. I was in the library at Georgia State University where I went to school, studying up on trademark and defending DM Records in front of the Trademark Trial and Appeals Board in Washington, and ended up prevailing on that case, which inspired me then to actually seek employment. Of course, at 34, I was a little bit old for the market, but the firm I'm with now, I've been with this firm for 19 years. It's been 21 years since I clerked with this firm. The firm is Hall Booth Smith right now. It's gone through various changes since then, but they took a chance on an older, non-traditional law student. And at that time, I wanted to build my entertainment practice. I was still writing songs. I was still playing music. And I had to do medical malpractice defense litigation work to bill hours to justify my existence at this law firm. So I cut my teeth trying cases on behalf of hospitals, doctors, other professionals, and defending them against malpractice claims. All along, at the same time, I was building my entertainment law practice, and it was tough. I was going out in Atlanta. I was going to clubs. At that time, I didn't know what it meant to be an entertainment lawyer. I didn't know what it meant to be an intellectual property lawyer. So I was going out and I was meeting as many artists as I could, because that's who I could relate to. And it was hard for a young, figuratively speaking, young lawyer trying to get into the entertainment field. I obviously wasn't going to go into a major label and say, hey, I'd like to represent you. So during that period of time, I got experience in the hip-hop world, obviously being in Atlanta, and I was privileged enough to represent a number of hip-hop artists and spoken word artists at that time that really helped me because copyright, as you might probably expect, in the hip-hop world is a lot more complicated than it is in the country world because of the sampling and because of the other aspects of creating music in that genre, in that world. One of my favorite clients, Airly Tari Jones, was with the band Arrested Development. She co-wrote Tennessee with Speech, and we've remained friends since that time. But she it was really interesting because she had some voice problems, and I met her through her physician, her otolaryngologist, who helped her with her voice problems. And this all happened because of my medical malpractice representation of clients, but she really impressed me as a poet, as a person. I still keep in touch with her, and she really opened my eyes to a lot of stuff. I mean, she gave me projects that had to do with copyright, had to do with Interscope Records, had to do with a lot of different areas of music that I had never been exposed to, being a acoustic, Dan Fogelberg-ish type artist myself. But all through this time, I continued playing my own music, and the reason I give you all this background is because I think when you're looking for an entertainment lawyer in this town, you have to take into consideration a number of different things. You got to take into consideration what aspect of your career you honestly feel you're in. If you feel you're at the very beginning stages of your career, you probably don't need a lawyer immediately. I would highly recommend going to websites like the Harry Fox website. The Harry Fox website is an incredibly good website for learning about copyright law, learning about licensing, learning about what you need to do to protect yourself against copyright infringement, as well as protect your own work against possible infringing behavior. The other websites that are hugely helpful are ASCAPs, BMIs, and CSACs. Every day I find myself on BMI or ASCAP's website looking for publishers, publishing information, looking for writer information, looking for all sorts of things. I'm an ASCAP affiliated writer, so I tend to lean toward ASCAP when I advise clients about PROs, but that's cyclical, and in this town you'll hear anecdotal evidence that one company is paying more than the other at a certain time, and I've been involved in comparisons. I've had one of my dearest friends was Harley Allen. I don't know if anybody here has heard of him, but he died a couple of years ago, but he was one of the top hit songwriters in this town. His dad, Red Allen's in the Bluegrass Hall of Honor. But I did a comparison for him. He had 7 number ones and 3 Grammys, and I did a comparison for him when he was with BMI. We were thinking about moving to CSAC, and I did a comparison analysis of what CSAC would pay versus what BMI would pay. And when you look at the trends over a long number of years, it's like the stock market. One company's going to pay more at certain times. Some companies are going to pay more going up to the top of the chart. Other companies are going to pay more coming down. So what it really comes down to with a PRO affiliation, and I know I'm bouncing all over the place, but what it comes down to with a PRO affiliation is who you get the most personal attention from, who you click with, and who you feel like really gets what you do and is interested in your career. They have BMI and ASCAP, since you can sign up online, they have just hundreds of thousands of people that are affiliated. So they're extremely busy. So if they don't take your call, or if they don't take a meeting immediately, it's not because they don't care, but it's because they're so extremely busy. But once you click with somebody and take the time to learn about the PRO personnel and what they do, they can be a huge, and I think
Clay brought that up, Jim brought it up, yeah,
right,
both did.
That they can open the door for you, not only with publishers, but with record labels. I know for a fact that, well, going back to some of my history, I started a company with a guy named Ronnie Brown, who was with MCA Records in the heyday of the 90s, with Tony Brown during the big years. And he and I started a company in 2004 called Big Time Music, and one of the projects we had was unabashedly my own daughter, who's here today, Dylan Taylor, and also a guy that she was going to high school with named Greg Bates. And she came to us and said, well, she came to me first and said, I gave Greg your business card. And I said, okay. And I have a natural conflict of interest. I'll give everybody a warning right away, since I do own my own music entertainment company, and I'm an entertainment lawyer. If you come to me with an exclusive artist agreement, or if you come to me and ask me for advice on whether or not you should sign with a particular record label, my natural conflict of interest would be if I said to you, no, that looks like a bad deal, but I have a company that may be interested in signing you. That's never been a problem. I'm actually kind of joking about that. But we signed Greg to a deal, and we had him in a publishing deal for a certain period of time, and we built up a small catalog. And he went on to Belmont, and he's now with Big Machine Records, and he had a number 5 with Did It For The Girl, and he's got a new song out, Fill in the Blank, right now. But what I was leading to with that was he affiliated with BMI. BMI did a lot for Greg in terms of opening the doors that led to that Big Machine deal. They made calls for him to publishers. They believed in his writing ability. And I would say that BMI had the biggest part in introducing Greg Bates to Scott Borchetta and Big Machine Records, and opening those doors through various publishing affiliations and entities along the way. So that being said, the PRO is a very important part of your career. The other thing about my background as a musician is when I first came back to Nashville in 2001 to open the office here of our law firm to expand my entertainment practice, I was playing writers' rounds, and I was just talking to Dope Turner, who's sitting over there. He and I met during that period of time, 2002, 2003, when he first started doing his wonderful service for songwriters in town. Don't let your friends play to empty rooms was the email that he would send out, and I relied on that email greatly as a songwriter playing writers rounds. And so my point is, I guess I've been through both the struggling songwriter kind of, in my case, delusion, I guess, that I could somehow spend the time necessary and do the networking and building the relationships with the writers I needed to build relationships with to write really quality hit songs that would be cut in the country market. I was fortunate enough to write a number of good songs with, of course, Harley, who is my good friend, and Craig Wiseman, and some other people that are big writers in town. So I did have some experience in that area, but I didn't have the time. I didn't have the... at that time, I was building my entertainment practice, so I was really having a hard time spreading myself too thin. But this also leads me to, if you're choosing an attorney, when you meet with that attorney, figure out if that attorney understands everything that you're doing. And everyone in this room is going to be very, very active in social media. If you go to an attorney, and the first thing I would do when you go meet with an attorney is first go online and see what their online presence is. That's not always a good indicator, but because of my artist delusions of grandeur, I have a Facebook page, I have a Twitter page, I have a Tumblr page, I have a Reverb Nation page, I have a MySpace page, I have, Flickr, I have all the various social media pages, and I work them actively because I want to see what's going on when I advise my clients, or when I'm looking at what is good for my clients, and to find out things like what Jay told us yesterday, that Twitter is not the second biggest social media site, it's YouTube. I immediately last night, in preparation for this, went to YouTube and went to my YouTube page, which I've had for a number of years now, since probably a year or two after YouTube first started, and dove into the inner workings, because one of the things, and Rick mentioned this before we started, that y'all will be talking about is posting cover tunes on YouTube. And that's a really mixed kind of bag in terms of rights and what you need to do to properly protect your own rights and properly respect the rights of others, other intellectual property creators who are involved in whatever you might be posting. But getting back to that, there are my former partner when I moved here, Derek Crownover, is not a musician, but he is a great entertainment lawyer, and I'd highly recommend him to anybody. Another good friend of mine, Orville Allman, is a great entertainment attorney in town. He's not a musician. He doesn't have a music background in terms of personally being involved. So you can find great attorneys that aren't musicians. You can also find great attorneys that are musicians. So it's just who you're comfortable with at the PRO, with your attorney. You're building a team is what you're doing, and that's what Rick is so great.
So it's back to the relationship thing again.
Right.
Whoever you build these comfortable relationships with.
And surrounding yourself with the people that you feel comfortable with. You don't want to go to a lawyer just to review a contract. You don't want to wait until you're being handed a list of attorneys from a record label or a publisher, and they're saying, we'll pick from this list of attorneys. These are the attorneys we'll pay out of your recoupable money to review your contract for you. You don't want to wait until that point. You want your attorney to have helped you along the way. I'm fortunate enough to be on a lot of those lists, but I particularly would rather meet somebody before they come to me in that circumstance, because there's a natural conflict of interest there too. If you're in front of a record label or in front of a publisher, and I'm not saying this goes on, but I'm just saying that there are conflicts of interest that are inherent in the practice of law, that whether or not they're real, they are actually possible. And if you're handed a list of attorneys by a record label or a publisher, you're going to an attorney that is somewhat dependent for their living on being on that list from that record label or that publisher. So that attorney, and most of the attorneys in town that are friends of mine that are on this list are entirely objective, and they will give you good advice, and they'll tell you what the contract says and let you make your own decision. But there is that possible inherent conflict of interest, so that's something to be conscious of. Rick and I were talking before this presentation about how to protect yourself up front from possibly going into an attorney who wants to overwork for you. And one of the examples I like to use, especially for a group like us who are DIY people, is a client of mine, Jared Neiman, who y'all might have heard of. Jared has been around town for a long time. He's been around town for at least as long as I have or longer. And he's been an incredibly hard worker for his own career. He currently is with Sony Arista in a co-venture deal with Seagale. But before that, he was playing clubs around town. He's an awesome songwriter. He wrote 3 of Garth Brooks' singles along with Richie Brown, and he got that through relationship building and being around town. He signed with Category 5, unfortunately, before he and I got really tight. And if y'all don't know the story of Category 5, it's no secret. There is a Wikipedia about it.
Ended with the FBI showing up to close the doors. So
yeah, so it was he had a single with Ray Termini in Category 5 that did fairly well, but when everything went down with Category 5, Jared was left with, what do I do with my career? And my goal as an attorney, as an entertainment attorney, is to see people build careers that are long-lasting, not sign them to the first label deal that comes along that's going to have a penny rate, that's going to require a ridiculous number of records to be sold in a market where physical albums do not sell in order for you to recoup. And not knowing the motivations of the record label for signing you. Are they quashing competition because you're doing so well with your numbers and your sales yourself? Or are they really going to get behind you? Or are they going to put you on their website and let you float down to the bottom of the website with everybody else and wait for you to do your own legwork in town and make the relationships necessary again, and then they've had you on the shelf as a tax break, and then once you've made the relationships yourself and they see you getting traction, then all of a sudden they're interested in putting renewed efforts behind your career. So, and I know I'm rambling a little bit, but what I think is important is that when you're starting out as an artist, and what we did with Jared was, he was playing at the Closing Bell here a lot over on de Montbriand. He teamed up with Dave Brainerd. He'd already done 2 of his own records. He teamed up with Dave Brainerd, who's a producer in town. His studio is over in the Off-Broadway Shoes building off the Circle there. And we would all go over, and it was a real community kind of recording situation. Everybody just hung out. And I was friends with Jared before we ever got into a legal relationship. But everybody would just hang out, and Jared recorded just an incredible record independently and spent just so much less than what a major label would have spent or anybody else would have spent. And it was a new concept. It was a country record with skits, which I was familiar with skits from my Atlanta days and my days in hip-hop, but skits on a country record, that was unheard of. So it was kind of interesting when we finally were negotiating.
What are skits?
Skits are usually 1 minute in duration, and they're in between the tracks, the songs on the record. And what they are, in Jared's case, they were humorous skits in between the songs that led into each song. The complicated thing is when you're negotiating with a record label, the traditional track track negotiations and royalties are based on how long a track is. Is a 1 minute track really a song? Do we really have to pay a full royalty to the performers on a 1-minute skit. It really was a complicated situation. But what led to that was Jared and I were meeting at Nashville on a regular basis, fairly regular basis, to discuss how he was going to fund his career. This was before Seagull got involved. And what I did was I developed an LLC model for an artist, and it was the first time I had done it. But Jared had gone out, and in doing his legwork, he had found investors who believed in his music and believed in what he was doing, because he was such a hard worker and was doing it just constantly. And so Jared and I developed an artist LLC, and what it was the Jared Neiman LLC 1, and this was for the first round of funding if these investors came through. And what it was it developed an LLC where the members contributed money. We had a business plan that I had developed that gave potential members of the LLC examples and hypotheticals of what a number 1 song would do, what a number 5 song, what a number 10 song, what radio performance royalties would look like. And the really interesting thing about this agreement was we, when I say radio performance royalties, we were giving that as an example, but the LLC and the investment was only going to be on the artist side. It wasn't going to touch publishing, and that was very important to Jared. Jared's publishing was an extremely important thing to him as a songwriter. So what we did was we built in a living allowance for Jared in the investment structure so that he would have a monthly salary as he was going about his working, so he wouldn't have to play the closing bell every night for tips, and help with the budget for the record, for the packaging, and for the manufacturing, and that kind of thing. We were on the cusp of some investors signing when Seagull got Eris to Sony interested, and from what I understand, it was one of Galani's last signings before he left. He wanted to really take, he saw it as a really independent, new kind of thing, and everybody really got involved, and it's a great success story. But what I'm getting to is this LLC model, and looking for your own way in the business now is the way to go. If you don't know Seagull, that's a great company too. That's Chris Dubois' company.
With Frank Rogers, Brad Paisley. They basically had it in with Joe, which was awesome. One of the things I want to focus on now that you brought up this LLC is what should they create early on in their career to protect themselves, to trying to go out and find investors. You have to be careful. I just read something where there were some guarantees of 10% for the money that you put in over 2 years, and a major label can't guarantee you a return. What is it they need to be careful of right now? Let's go away from the investors for a second, but let's talk about, okay, here we are, chasing lovely. This is the business, how you should set up to protect yourself early on, get your bank account, that kind of thing.
One of the things you have to do when you affiliate with a PRO, and you have to understand as a songwriter, you earn income in 2 ways. You earn income on the writer side, and you earn income on the publisher side. So one of the things you have to do when you affiliate with a PRO is affiliate as a writer, and until you get your own publishing deal, you got to affiliate as a publisher, because it's paid in 2 streams. It used to be, the joke used to be, how can anything be 200%? BMI and ASCAP always worked in 200% because you had 100% of the writer's side and 100% of the publisher's side. Now they've changed that so that it makes more sense. It's the 50% writer side, the 50% publisher side. When you affiliate as a writer, you can obviously use your own name, and you'll get a CAE number for your own name as a writer. But when you affiliate as a publisher for yourself, you're going to have to give them a publisher name. And if you look at the ASCAP, BMI, CSAC databases, you'll see all sorts of odd publisher names. And that's because you have to pick one that's never been picked before. And you have to use a different one in each PRO. You can't use the same one. So you got to come up with 3 different ones. virtually. Now, in the beginning, you only have to come up with one, which is wherever you are. If you're a BMI, you just have to have your writer's account set up and a publisher account set up. It's only if you start co-writing and you start getting cuts with other writers, other PROs, and there are streams of income coming through all three that you have to start setting up at other ones. But so in the process of doing that, a lot of people will just set up their publisher entity with their PRO as just a sole proprietorship, which is what it's going to be automatically if you don't consciously decide you want to be an entity. Well, the problem with the sole proprietorship is now that's considered under the law your alter ego. So the sole proprietorship gives you no personal shield from liability for copyright infringement or anything else. So the LLC stands for Limited Liability Company, and that's exactly what it is. It's limited liability, and the beauty of the LLC is that it dispensed with a lot of the formalities that corporations imposed on their shareholders. That the LLC vehicle was extremely flexible. You didn't have to be a natural person to be a member. You can actually have members that are entities. Other entities can be members of LLCs. And it dispensed with the formalities of having bylaws, minutes, all sorts of things to create the separate entity that used to be required with a corporation to prove and to keep people from, quote unquote, piercing the corporate veil and attacking you personally. So the other beauty of the LLC, too, is that you can attract, like we were talking about, potential investors and offer them membership interests in your LLC. Now, what Rick's talking about in terms of the investment and the potential liability there are things called blue sky laws. There's a big governmental arm called the Security and Exchange Commission, which scares me to death. And I always affiliate. I have a couple of friends that are just SEC lawyers, and I always go to them before, and I went to them with Jared's thing to talk about SEC Reg D filings and whether or not the investors are qualified investors, and that's that all stems from investment individuals and entities who enticed people into situations without fully divulging the risks. Obviously, anybody getting involved in investing in the music business, if they don't understand the risk, they've been living under a rock. But at the same time, you still have a legal obligation to divulge all the potential risks of losing all your money. So that's an important aspect of having somebody, a legal representative of some kind, to give you advice as to whether or not you can offer particular investment opportunities to certain individuals. You obviously can't get on the internet and advertise that you're looking for investors. That's not appropriate, and it doesn't work under the SEC Regulation D filings, which are the easiest way to get investors. But
So let me ask you about that. What about like Kickstarter? Is that pretty much primarily what you're doing when you go online and ask for investors?
Yeah, and Kickstarter is a little bit different, because Kickstarter, when someone goes on Kickstarter, presumably, and this is like YouTube, it's like Facebook, it's like anything else, you say yes when you agree to the terms. And if you read those terms and conditions, they do include blue sky type warnings. But Kickstarter is an example of looking for investors. Now, because of Kickstarter's presence and their publicity, it's pretty obvious. And one of the things about Kickstarter that's different is it's not really an investment. The artist
is saying, I'm going to give you this for the, okay.
There's a quid pro quo there, so that kind of makes it different. They're either going to do an outgoing message for you on your phone in return for your $100, or they're going to come to a house party, or so you're saying, I'm going to pay you back. You're not saying you're going to get a return on your investment, or I'm going to pay you more than your investment.
You're going to give them something of perceived value for that investment that they make. Now, when somebody decides that they want to try to put investors in this, how dangerous is that? Go ahead and get a sip. If all of a sudden the label comes into play and your LLC has been, giving away all this stuff, and now how can they protect themselves? Because a lot of people are going to need some funding in the beginning to get this done. They're going to want to offer something. Is that deterrent to a label when they look at it and go, man, you've already promised yourself to death? You're never going to make a dime in this business now, and you're going to get frustrated and quit. And could it deter a label from wanting to sign you if they see you're too spread out?
Yeah, it absolutely could deter a label if you're not careful in how you structure the investment and how much you get. If the label feels like the investment they're going to have to make to buy out or pay the already established member equity stakes, then yeah, a major label could be seriously deterred. But at the same time, if you've structured it where you're, and independently, you're going to be working on a budget that is much less than a major label. And so when a major label comes in and sees that your record only costs this, you've only got this much, and if it's a really great project and you're a really great artist, they're going to have no problem as part of the advance and recording fund giving you the money to cover that investment capital.
Like with Jared, didn't they license his record? They took his and Dave's record and they licensed it, so Jared owns the masters, but they have the ability to exploit it for X number of years or something like that.
Right. And one of the things that I laugh about a little bit was the record was so inexpensive that it was I was kind of advising Jared not to tell them exactly how much it cost, but he was completely forthright. I'm just kidding about that.
But what that did, just so you know, because I was consulting Sony at the time, is all of a sudden budgets for records got much cheaper, especially for a brand new artist. And Sony started including, if you have been a platinum artist in the past, you're enabled this budget. And if you haven't, you're only allowed this budget, because it was Jared and Dave who kind of said, holy crap, we can make a record for $75,000. When that used to be the catering budget for some of these records, and in the 70s it was the drug and catering budget for some of these records that was factored in. So with what you're doing, with what you're spending, and keeping great records of all these things, it also, I think, can show you as a business person to some of these labels and them going, wow, this person's kept great records. They're a great partner, because they're not just wandering in here saying, hey, fix me. What would your thoughts be on just making sure that everybody has their ducks in a row, so when they sit with a label, they become a great partner?
Well, that's one of the most impressive things, and that's what one of Rick's most valuable messages and lessons is that this is your career. You're the CEO of your career, and you have to take ownership, and you have to show that you are willing to work. And one of the things I've noticed recently about Big Machine and Scott Borchetta are the people they're signing, like Greg Bates, are hard workers. They go out and work for their own career. Eden's Edge, Dean Berner, who played Dobro a lot for Dylan Taylor, my daughter, he was a very hard worker, very diligent, very focused. And if you look across the board, you would know better than anyone, Rick. But I mean, it looks to me like, from the outside looking in, hard work and conscientiousness and attention to detail is extremely important.
It is, and I think what's even more important than that, because Eden's Edge just recently got dropped from Big Machine Records, and the reason being is that their lead singer decided to get married, and the label perceived that as possibly then soon wanting to have kids and a lot of different things. But one of the interesting things about Eden's Edge, and I absolutely adore them, is that major label, tons of tours, were spending boatloads of time on Facebook and Twitter, never spent any time getting to know who their fans were. So the label put millions of dollars into this band. They get launched, their record comes out, and first week sales were only 9,000 units. That's not a lot. To an independent artist, that's a six-figure income. To a major label artist that's invested $1 million into you, and this was their third single, they're sitting there going, holy cow. Now the thing is the band wasn't doing anything wrong. They just weren't being taught that you need to make sure when you're doing your Facebook stuff and there's certain content that needs to be exclusive to those people that you have access to. They did what I like to call the push and pray method. Pray until something happens. That's what push stands for. You kind of push it out there and pray. What happened was they were dependent upon people remembering, wow, my record comes out on Tuesday, I need to go buy it. Wow, I see Eden's Edge all the time sending me Facebook messages. I should remember to go buy their record on that Tuesday. What I try to teach is that you've got an email list, so you're doing a countdown 12 days up to the fact that you're giving something away all those days, driving those people, or you're giving something in advance to get them to pre-order it. Now, they put up a pre-order. Pre-orders are very small. Even for Taylor Swift, her pre-order was very small. But when she started adding things to value to the package, all of a sudden those things started happening. So hard work is great, and a lot of you are going to work really hard. People always go, work smart, not hard. Bullshit. I can't get by on smart work. I get by on hard work. You want to work real hard, and you want to outwork everybody else, not outsmart everybody else, because then you're dependent upon things. If you're a hard worker, you can take it into your own hands. But one of the things that I love, and Karl and I talk about this a lot, is that, we said it earlier, your rewards aren't in direct proportion to the work that you put in. As an attorney, you work an hour, you bill an hour. You know exactly what happens. As an artist, you work 20 hours. Wait, my tip jar's empty. You have no control over it. Doesn't mean that you didn't work as hard. So what we're trying to teach you to do is build up your business so that your hard work pays off for you. One of the things, what do you think of companies like LegalZoom or things like that? Or people trying to take shortcuts on the legal side? People are always budgeting, and they're saying, okay, I'm going to spend $12,000 on this recording, but I'm only going to spend $100 on protecting my whole business. What do you think about companies like LegalZoom or things like that for this?
For this, I wouldn't even recommend going to your family lawyer. Entertainment law is such a different animal that there's just no way. Now, I have to confess that, for my personal will, yeah, I went to LegalZoom and pulled a will off of LegalZoom. But when it comes to the music business, there's so many nuances and so many angles that don't involve legal contracts. And you might be able to form an LLC. Actually, you can form an LLC in Tennessee.
$300.
Yeah, Secretary of State website. You can set up your own LLC and file your articles of organization electronically, literally overnight. So you can do that yourself. But when it comes to creating the operating agreement and creating the business plan, until you have your own operating agreement, you're operating under the Tennessee statute, and that's okay, but it's better to have your own operating agreement and set forth the things that you want to happen. I was just thinking about what Rick was just saying, and Dylan Taylor has the 7 free songs, and that was playing when I walked in, which was pretty cool. But Dylan Taylor put out the 7 free songs with Rick, and one of the great things that we recognized in my other company, Next Century Music, we've been working with Rick to work with Dylan Taylor, and now we have Cora Keller in a publishing deal, and we're extremely excited about that. But one of the greatest responses that we got was when Dylan went into the 200 or so first subscribers on our 7 free song list and recorded individual videos using the first name of whoever that person was on the MailChimp list. And of course, if there was more than one Bob, you could use that video more than once. But
by the way, this was not my idea. This was Ronnie Brown and Dylan's idea to go out and do this. So my goal is to always spur your own thinking. I don't want you going point by point by point on what I do. I want you expanding on it. And that was brilliant because I got to see the responses and emails.
And people were so incredibly impressed by the fact that the artist reached out to them by name in a video to their email, that now you're starting to develop these super fans. And, as I looked at the model, I was thinking to myself, because I'm thinking about building a career for her, if you have 1,000 of these super fans that are willing to spend $8.50 or $9 a month on a regular basis, you as an artist now have a 6-figure income every year. And that means you can make money doing what you love. Now, whether or not that means you're going to be in front of thousands of people in stadiums or not is different. I think yesterday, I forgot who it was, if it was Clay or Jay, who was talking about being able to make huge amounts of money as an artist in especially Texas, but in 3 states.
I was sharing about Aaron Watson, what he did, $2 million a year, yeah.
And there, another one is John Stone, who is making a career, and so is Tom Shepard, who's another client of mine. We do a lot with his song Redneck Yacht Club. We actually have a registered trademark on Redneck Yacht Club, and he's actually monetizing that. So you keep, I forgot where I was going with that, but to hurry with the LLC analogy, one of the great things I read, and I made some copies, and if you're wondering how I can get away with copying out of Billboard magazine, there is a thing called fair use under the Copyright Act, and I consider this an educational purpose. It's the article, if anybody wants a copy, it's the article on Macklemore and Ryan Lewis from the January 12, 2013 Billboard. This is an incredible story of an independent artist, and Jay brought them up just in passing yesterday, but it's an incredible story of how an independent artist, Macklemore, and his producer Ryan Lewis started their own LLC. They met on MySpace 5 years ago. They started their own LLC, and by word of mouth, hard touring, and social media networking, they sold 78,000 copies of their record, and they got something like 4 million YouTube views. And because of word of mouth, ADA, which is a Warner affiliate, an independent distribution arm, they got wind of the traction and the action. And what happened was now Macklemore and Lewis LLC could partner with ADA and Warner and actually have leverage. So all they needed was distribution. And one of the things they said was their artistic integrity and their own business would not be affected. And so they did a one-off with ADA, and it did incredibly well. They're now #1 on the Hot 100. Another great independent artist story is the Lumineers with Dual Tone here in town.
Right.
It happens. And
the thing too with the distribution deal, and then we'll wrap this up. What we're going to do, just so you know, is Carl's going to be here. So after Sharia's done, before lunch, if you guys have questions for Carl, we'll jump into that, because what I said to him was when we first started is I just wanted you guys to hear his story because I knew he'd weave in some legal stuff within his story. That's why you saw me just sitting over here. I'm a fan of his, as you guys know, and it was one of those things where I want you to be able to have access to him, and these stories are great. But real quick on a distribution deal versus a record deal. Record deals are usually 85-15, which means after everybody's been paid out of the dollar, the record label gets the 85 pennies, you get the 15 pennies. When you do a distribution deal, it means you brought the record, you had total creative control, and those are getting in the 60, 40, 70, 30 with you being the 60 or you being the 70 in a lot of cases. I know right now record companies are doing distribution deals where the artist is making bank on those because they brought the crowd, they brought the touring, they brought the various things to the table that made a lot of sense. So,
and if I could just throw in one more quick story on YouTube, since y'all are going to be talking about cover tunes on YouTube. When you put a cover tune up on YouTube, even though everybody's doing it, you are entirely responsible for the licensing of that underlying content. Under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, though, YouTube has to receive a very specific notice from the content owner, putting them on notice of specifically what's infringing. You're then notified by YouTube, and some of you may have received these, and my story is a personal story. But what happens then is you have to acknowledge that you've used third-party content when they notify you. Now you can say, I dispute that this is third-party content, but if you say you dispute it, then that puts the content owner who's put YouTube on notice in a position of having to sue you. If they don't sue you, YouTube can put that back up within 10 to 14 days. Now realistically, are you going to get pulled down for putting up a cover tune? No. YouTube gives the content owner 3 options. They can block you, they can monetize you, or they can track the analytics on how your video is doing. So they have a content ID system, and it's amazing. If you watch the videos on YouTube, it's amazing how this content ID system works. Content owners provide their content ID program with digital and physical copies of tracks, and every time someone downloads a video to YouTube, it goes into this content ID, and it's compared to all the millions of songs that are already there. And it's an incredible process, but they will identify, and my personal story is, and I'm getting back to fair use because I did this for educational purposes. I posted a cover tune on YouTube. I did my own version of Redneck Friend by Jackson Browne, which is back in my era. And I posted it on YouTube, which you can find at Karl Braun. I hope to see a lot of likes. And
what's your Twitter?
But my Twitter is Karl M. Braun also. Everywhere.
And it's Brown, B-R-A-U-N.
And Karl with a K, and M in the middle. But what I did was Ronnie and I went into our studio and I recorded Redneck Friend with Ronnie. And I put it up on YouTube. And I immediately was thinking about this. It's the only cover tune I have up on YouTube. So yeah, it's for educational purposes. But in the process, I found out, because I wanted to be able to say, this is how you do it. When you put it up, you're going to have to find out, and Harry Fox is where you're going to go, and ASCAP or BMI. In this case, I took Harry Fox and ASCAP. All I did was I went to Harry Fox, and I looked at what it would cost to get a mechanical license. Well, that wasn't enough because I videoed it. So now we got to get a sync license. That's putting the music in timed relation to images, and that's what this was. So I went to Harry Fox, and then I went to ASCAP, and I found out that the Redneck Friend publisher is Shallow Turn Music. I found that out at ASCAP. It was really easy. I looked up Shallow Turn Music, and they're handled by a company out in LA called Gelfand, Rennert, and Feldman. This is an LLP, and a company that handles high-income net worth individuals' business. It's a business management firm. It's not a publisher. It's not a law firm. It's very interesting. So what I then did was I found an email, and I haven't done this yet, I confess, but I'm about to send the email to this email address, and I'm going to call them because I have their phone number, and I'm going to say, look, I put this YouTube cover tune up of Redneck Friend, and I'd like to have a gratis license for this because I'm not monetizing it, I'm not promoting it as my own. I've put up there that it's a tribute to my hero, Jackson Browne. I've given the attribution, and see what they say. But for purposes of this group, I'm taking the position it's a fair use because I'm doing it for educational purposes. And it was educational for me because it taught me that it's very easy to secure the rights for these cover songs. Now, realistically, are you going to need to do it with every cover song you post? No, but just be aware that you are responsible, and the terms and conditions that you agree to at YouTube say you indemnify, hold them harmless, and submit to the jurisdiction of California courts in the event that anybody comes out of the woodwork. And if your cover tune starts getting traction, I would do it immediately. Because once it starts getting traction, that means it's no longer a situation where, well, they'll never come after me, that's too much trouble. And it's the right thing to do is the main thing. I mean, we're all content owners, we're all creators, it's the right thing to do, and there's no such thing as less than 10 bars, mailing it to yourself. There's no such thing as even a religious organization or a charity organization only creating a certain number of copies to give away for their charity. That's still considered copyright infringement. And it doesn't even have to be willful. It can be what's called innocent infringement, which means you can do it and not even know you're doing it, or be supervising somebody or directing somebody and not knowing they're doing it and be guilty of innocent copyright infringement. If it's willful, statutory damages, regardless of your profit, can be up to $150,000 per infringement. So if they know you came to this seminar and I told you that technically you are responsible for your cover tune content on YouTube, you now enter that realm of willful. So I would highly recommend just taking the very simple step of going to ASCAP or BMI and typing in the title of whatever you're covering and getting the publisher information for that song and getting all the contact information. And if you do it at the front end, when you're not getting traction on the video, you're likely to get a gratis license. They're going to say, thank you so much for coming to us and asking for permission. or a very cheap license. Now, you know, Harry Fox is a great place to go to find out how much you need to pay for, you know, less than 2,500 copies of a CD you want to manufacture, or permanent downloads, or ringtones, or interactive streaming. But for syncing on YouTube, I highly recommend, you know, from an attorney and a legal standpoint, and for legal advice purposes, to have that information, know that information, be knowledgeable and be educated on what you're putting up there, whose content you're putting up, and what purpose is it there for. So it's the fair thing. You would want that, you know, once you're a big star or a big writer or a big publisher or a big record label, you're going to want people reaching out to you and saying, hey, I respect your intellectual property. I want to ask your permission. So if nothing else, that's my comments on it.
Great. And then I'll end by saying this. This will now keep you from going out and buying fake views and fake likes because you're paying for them. So you don't want to create any unnecessary eyeballs on yourself if you don't have to. That's why I say be legit. I would much rather know that you have 40 people to come watch you play at my bar than you telling me you have 4,000 and nobody shows up, because then I don't invite you back again. So let's put our hands together for Karl. Thank you so much.